I'm Freya, 32 female. I live in a small but cozy loft apartment that doubles as the first real headquarters for my skincare brand, Aura Organics. I started this business with nothing but a few $100s and a deep-seated passion for natural ingredients, and today, it's my entire life. It's a story of sleepless nights, stained countertops, and relentless determination. But this story isn't just about building a business. It's about how the person I should have been able to trust the most, my own sister, tried to steal it all right from under me, not just for the money, but to rewrite my entire history of success as her own. She underestimated me, though. She thought I was just the quiet, creative type, but she forgot that the same hands that can gently formulate a face cream can also gather every single receipt to dismantle a web of lies. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The story of Aura Organics didn't start in a boardroom or with a hefty investment from our father, Michael. It started in my tiny college apartment kitchen, a space so small you could touch the stove and the sink at the same time. I was 22, studying botany, and obsessed with the idea that everything our skin needed could be found in nature, not in a lab full of unpronounceable chemicals. My battle with sensitive skin and eczema had been a lifelong struggle. Dermatologists prescribed steroid creams that thinned my skin and offered only temporary relief. I was tired of being a patient and decided to become my own solution. My first lab was a collection of mason jars, a double boiler I bought from a thrift store, and a notebook filled with frantic scribbles about the properties of calendula, chamomile, and shea butter. My friends thought it was a quirky hobby. They'd come over and see my countertops littered with herbs, oils, and beeswax, and they'd laugh, calling me a little kitchen witch. I didn't mind. While they were out partying, I was infusing oils under the moonlight, not for any mystical reason, but because my windowsill was the only place with consistent, gentle warmth. My sister, Rachel, was 2 years younger and a world away in her ambitions. While I was geeking out over saponification values and the molecular structure of hyaluronic acid, she was studying public relations, mastering the art of the perfect Instagram post, and networking at every party. She found my hobby endearing, but ultimately pointless. "Freya, this is cute," she'd say, wrinkling her nose at the earthy smell of my latest batch of healing balm. "But you can't possibly make a living selling homemade goop in little jars." For years, she was right. It wasn't a living, it was a passion. I gave my products away to friends and family. My roommate's acne cleared up. A friend's psoriasis became manageable. My own eczema retreated for the first time in my life. The positive feedback was the fuel I needed. After graduation, I got a job as a lab assistant at a local university to pay the bills, but every spare moment and every spare dollar went into Aura Organics. I built a rudimentary website myself, using a drag-and-drop builder that looked clunky but functional. I learned photography by watching hours of online tutorials, trying to make my simple amber glass jars look luxurious against a backdrop of a white sheet. The first 5 years were a brutal, lonely grind. I remember packing my first 50 online orders on my living room floor, surrounded by shipping labels and bubble wrap, my back aching. I was the researcher, the formulator, the manufacturer, the photographer, the web designer, the marketing department, and the shipping clerk. I once spent an entire weekend hand-labeling 1,000 lip balms, my fingers raw and cramped. During this time, Rachel was climbing her own ladder in the PR world. She was glamorous, always dressed in designer clothes, and spoke of a life that felt a million miles away from my reality of weighing out cocoa butter and wrestling with postage costs. She, visit for holidays, glance at my growing collection of equipment, and offer unsolicited advice. "You really need better branding, Freya. This all looks so homemade." She never offered to help, only to critique. The turning point came about 6 years in. A popular green beauty blogger discovered my miracle balm. She wrote a glowing review, and overnight, my world exploded. My clunky website crashed from the traffic. Orders flooded in faster than I could possibly handle. It was terrifying and exhilarating. I quit my lab job, took out a small business loan using the little savings I had as collateral, and rented a small workshop space. This is when I hired my first real employee, Zoe. She was a friend of a friend, incredibly organized, and saw the potential in my chaotic little operation. Zoe became my rock. She streamlined my inventory, managed customer service, and helped me scale up production without compromising the handcrafted quality that made my brand special. With Zoe handling operations, I could focus on what I did best, creating. We launched a full skincare line, a cleanser, a serum, a moisturizer. We got certified organic. We invested in professional branding and packaging, thanks to a freelance designer I hired. His name was Ben, a quiet but brilliant artist who understood my vision perfectly. We started getting attention from retail stores. First, small local boutiques, then larger, well-known organic market chains. Every new contract felt like a monumental victory, a validation of all those lonely nights in the kitchen. My father, Michael, a financial advisor, was cautiously proud. He was a man who understood numbers, risk, and return on investment. In the beginning, he saw my business as a high-risk, low-return hobby. "Are you sure about this, Freya?" he'd ask, looking over my messy spreadsheets. "It's a very competitive market." But as Aura Organics grew, his skepticism turned to admiration. He'd call me to talk about profit margins and expansion strategies. I finally felt seen by him, not just as his dreamy, artistic daughter, but as a competent business owner. It was a feeling I had craved for a long time. Rachel's attitude shifted too, but in a different way. Her condescending amusement was replaced by a strange, proprietary interest. She started showing up at my workshop, not to help, but to observe, to be seen. She'd take selfies among the shelves of beautifully packaged products and post them with vague captions like, "So proud of what we're building," or "Big things happening at our family company." I found it annoying, but I brushed it off as her typical social media theatrics. I was too busy, too focused, and frankly, too happy to get into an argument over a hashtag. I never imagined that her captions weren't just harmless vanity. They were the seeds of a narrative she was carefully planting, a story in which she wasn't just a spectator to my success, but its co-architect. And I, in my exhaustion and joy, was completely oblivious to the fact that she was slowly, methodically, beginning to rewrite my history. The transition was so gradual, so insidious that I barely noticed it happening. It started with small things. At family gatherings, if someone complimented me on the success of Aura Organics, Rachel would jump in before I could even say thank you. "Thanks, we've been working so hard," she'd say, linking her arm through mine. The first few times, I was taken aback but didn't correct her. It felt petty to start a "no, I worked hard" argument in front of our aunts and uncles. I'd just offer a tight-lipped smile and try to steer the conversation back to the products themselves. I thought it was just her way of feeling included. Her involvement escalated when we were featured in a major magazine. It was a huge milestone for us. The journalist was interested in my founder's story, the kitchen experiments, the slow grind, the sudden breakthrough. I spent hours on the phone with her, sharing every detail. When the article was published, it was a beautiful 2-page spread with a stunning photo of me in my workshop. I was ecstatic. I sent the link to my family's group chat, and the congratulations poured in. An hour later, Rachel posted the article on her social media. "So humbled to see our story in print," she wrote. "It's been a crazy journey, but we always believed in our vision." Our story. The words felt like a splinter under my skin. I called her immediately. "Rachel, what was that caption about? It makes it sound like you were involved from the beginning." Her laugh was light and airy, designed to disarm. "Oh, Freya, don't be so sensitive. I'm your sister, your success is my success. I'm just being supportive. You know how important a unified brand message is. It's PR 101. She was an expert at making me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. Sensitive. Petty. I hung up the phone feeling confused and frustrated. Was I overreacting? Maybe this was just how sisters in a close family behaved. I tried to let it go, burying my unease under a mountain of work. We were preparing to launch in a national department store chain, a deal that would change the entire trajectory of the company, and I couldn't afford any distractions. This is when Rachel's help began in earnest. She insisted she could handle the PR for the national launch. "You can't trust some stranger with this, Freya. This is our family's legacy. I know the story better than anyone," she argued. My father, Michael, agreed with her. "She's a professional, Freya. It makes sense to keep it in the family. It'll save you money, too." Reluctantly, I agreed. I thought, at the very least, she could write a press release and contact a few media outlets. I gave her a clear brief, a detailed timeline of the company's history, and a list of key talking points, all emphasizing that this was a brand built from my personal struggle and scientific passion. What she did with that information was a masterclass in manipulation. She designed a sleek press kit, and on the About Us page, she wrote, "Founded by sisters Freya and Rachel, Aura Organics was born from a shared passion for natural beauty. While Freya, a trained botanist, developed the formulas, Rachel leveraged her PR expertise to build the brand from a kitchen table hobby into a nationally recognized name." When I saw it, my blood ran cold. "Rachel, this is a lie," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rage. "You weren't there. You called it homemade goop. You told me it would never work." We were in my office at the workshop. Zoe was in the next room, and I consciously kept my voice down. Rachel, however, was perfectly calm. She leaned against my desk, looking at me with a patient, condescending smile. "Freya, you're the creative genius, the heart of the company. I've never denied that. But you have to admit you had no idea how to build a brand. I've been guiding you for years. My advice, my connections, my understanding of the market, that's what took your goop and made it a business. We're a team, a partnership, yin and yang." Her gaslighting was so profound, so utterly confident, that for a split second I actually questioned my own memory. Had she been giving me crucial advice all along that I'd just forgotten? Had her cynical remarks actually been constructive criticism that I was too sensitive to hear correctly? But then the fog cleared, and I remembered the years of solitude, the financial risks I took alone, the dismissal in her voice. "That's not true," I said firmly. "My business was already successful before you showed any interest. The blog feature, the first retail contracts, that all happened without you." She sighed dramatically, as if dealing with a difficult child. "The blog was a lucky break. It wouldn't have led to anything without a proper strategy, a strategy I helped you form. You just don't see it because you're too bogged down in the day-to-day. Dad sees it. He understands that a business needs two sides, the product and the promotion. You're the product, I'm the promotion. It's a perfect synergy." The mention of our father was a strategic blow. She had been working on him for months, framing her involvement as essential. As a financial advisor, he understood the concept of sweat equity and partnerships. Rachel had successfully pitched herself as the missing half of my equation, and he had bought it completely. The national launch was a huge success, but for me, it was tainted. At the launch party, an event Rachel organized, she stood beside me on the stage. When the CEO of the department store praised me as a visionary founder, Rachel took the microphone. "Thank you so much," she beamed. "Freya and I are just so thrilled. We've dreamed of this moment since we were little girls mixing lotions in our kitchen." The crowd applauded. My team, including Zoe, looked confused. They knew the real story. But to the outside world, and increasingly to our own family, we were the dynamic sister duo who had conquered the beauty world together. She was crafting a mythology, and I was being relegated to a character in her story. The worst part was the insidious doubt she planted in my mind. She was so convincing that I started to feel ungrateful, as if I were somehow erasing her supposed contributions by clinging to the truth. Her power grab wasn't just about money or credit. It was a hostile takeover of my reality, and she was using my own family as her board of directors to approve the merger. The success of the national launch should have been the happiest time of my professional life. Aura Organics was thriving, revenue was soaring, and we were getting offers for international distribution. But in my personal life, a chilling reality was setting in. Rachel's fabricated narrative wasn't just for public consumption anymore. It had become the accepted truth within our family, and she had appointed our father, Michael, as its chief enforcer. It began with phone calls from my dad. They started casually. "Rachel mentioned you two are thinking of expanding to Europe. Sounds like a great move. She has a real knack for this global strategy stuff." I'd try to correct him gently. "Dad, that's my plan. I've been researching EU regulations for months. Rachel just heard me talking about it." He'd brush it off with a chuckle. "Well, it's great you two are so in sync. That's the key to a good partnership." Partnership? That word again. It was the cornerstone of Rachel's campaign. She knew that to our father, a man who built his career on advising clients about sound financial structures, the idea of a formal partnership was sacred. My solitary, self-made success story was messy and lacked the neatness of a twoper. Sun team. Rachel's version was clean, logical, and much more appealing. She was the business-savvy PR mind, and I was the creative, slightly scattered inventor. Together, we were a complete package. It was a narrative he could understand and, more importantly, be proud of. The real shift in his attitude came a few weeks later. We were having our weekly family dinner, me, Rachel, and Dad. I was excited to tell him about a new, sustainable sourcing agreement I'd secured with a women's cooperative in Ghana for our shea butter. It was a huge ethical and commercial win for the brand. Before I could even get to the details, Rachel interrupted. "Speaking of big wins, Dad, I need your advice on something," she said, pulling some documents from her purse. "Freya and I have been discussing the company's legal structure. As we grow, it's just not smart for the business to be a sole proprietorship under Freya's name. It leaves us vulnerable. I think it's time we formalize our partnership. I had a lawyer draft a standard partnership agreement. I'm thinking a 60-40 split would be fair. Freya remains the majority owner, of course, but it recognizes my role as a co-founder and head of strategy." I stared at her, then at the documents she slid across the table towards our father. I was speechless. 40%. She wanted 40% of the company I had bled for, a company she had once mocked. She wanted to be legally recognized as a co-founder. It was the most audacious, delusional power play I could have ever imagined. "Rachel, are you out of your mind?" I finally managed to say, my voice low and shaking. "There is no partnership. This is my company." Rachel didn't even look at me. She kept her eyes on our father, her expression a perfect mask of calm reason. "Freya, please don't be emotional. This is a business decision. Look at the numbers since I took over the PR and strategy. Sales have tripled. We're in every major magazine. That's not a coincidence. That's my work." "I hired you as a freelance PR consultant for one launch," I shot back, my voice rising. "I paid your invoices. That doesn't make you a co-founder." This is when my father stepped in and his words broke my heart. "Freya, calm down," he said, his tone firm and disappointed. He picked up the documents Rachel had brought. "Let's not be dramatic. Rachel has a valid point. From what I've seen, her contributions have been invaluable. A business isn't just about making the product, it's about selling it. You've both done your part. A 60-40 split sounds more than fair to me." "In fact," he added, looking at Rachel with admiration, "it's generous of you to suggest it, Rachel." I felt the air leave my lungs. He wasn't just taking her side, he was actively championing her. He saw me as emotional and ungrateful, and Rachel as generous and business-minded. She had played him perfectly, appealing to his logical, financial brain while painting me as the flighty artist who didn't understand her own success. She had spent months feeding him a steady diet of "we" and "our," telling him about the strategic moves we were making, taking credit for every win while framing every challenge as something we overcame together. I realized with dawning horror that she had been laying the groundwork for this exact moment for over a year. "Dad, you don't understand," I pleaded, my eyes welling up with tears of pure frustration. "She wasn't there. For years, she wasn't there. I built this from nothing. I have the records, the loan documents, the original business registration. It's all in my name because it's mine." He sighed, the sound heavy with paternal weariness. "Freya, records can be changed. What matters is what's fair now. Your sister is helping you build an empire, and she deserves to be recognized and compensated for it. Don't let your pride get in the way of good business sense. You're being selfish." Selfish? The word hit me like a physical blow. I had sacrificed my 20s, poured every ounce of my energy and my own money into this dream. I had employed people, built a respected brand, and created products that genuinely helped people. And I was being called selfish for wanting to protect it, for refusing to hand over nearly half of it to someone who had done nothing but lie. I looked at Rachel. She was watching me, a faint, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She had won. She had successfully turned our father, the one person whose approval I had worked so hard to earn, completely against me. He now saw me as an obstacle to the continued success of the family business. I knew then that arguing was useless. Logic had no place here. This was a battle of narratives, and hers had triumphed over my truth. I stood up from the table, my dinner untouched. "I need to go," I whispered, and walked out before they could see me break down completely. As I drove home, the tears finally came, hot and bitter. This wasn't just about a business anymore. My sister was systematically erasing me from my own life, and she was using our family as the eraser. I spent the next 48 hours in a fog of grief and rage. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't go to the workshop. I just sat in my apartment, staring at the walls, replaying that dinner conversation over and over in my head. My father's words, "Selfish, don't let your pride get in the way," echoed relentlessly. Rachel's smug, victorious smile was burned into my memory. They had cornered me, isolated me, and made me feel like I was crazy. For a moment, I almost gave in. Maybe it was easier to just sign the papers, to give her the 40% and buy some semblance of peace. But then, on the third morning, something inside me shifted. The grief hardened into resolve. The helplessness sharpened into a cold, clear anger. I was not selfish. I was not crazy. I was the founder of Aura Organics, and I would not let my life's work be stolen by a manipulative liar, even if she was my sister. She wanted to talk business? Fine, we would talk business. And in business, the truth isn't found in feelings or family dynamics. It's found in the data. It's found in the paper trail. I called the one person I knew would be in my corner, no questions asked. "Zoe," I said when she picked up, my voice hoarse, "I need your help. Can you come over?" When Zoe arrived at my apartment, I laid everything out for her. The 60-40 partnership demand, my father's reaction, Rachel's carefully constructed lies about being a co-founder. Zoe listened patiently, her expression growing darker with every word. She had been with me since the days of the tiny workshop. She had seen my struggle and my growth firsthand. "I knew she was a piece of work, Freya, but this is next level," Zoe said, shaking her head in disbelief. She never took over strategy. She gave unsolicited opinions. We never implemented a single one of her ideas without you vetting and approving it first. And most of them were terrible, like wanting to add glitter to the face masks. Hearing Zoe validate my reality was like a lifeline. "I know," I said, "but my dad believes her. He thinks she's this business guru. She told him her work is why our sales tripled." "Our sales tripled because we got into a national department store, a deal you landed after 2 years of negotiations," Zoe countered immediately. Her PR launch was just the final step. It's like the person who puts the cherry on top of a cake claiming they baked the whole thing. That was it. That was the spark I needed. "So, let's show him the recipe," I said, a new energy surging through me. "Let's bake the whole cake again on paper. I want to find every thing, every email, every invoice, every legal document, every text message that tells the real story of how this company was built." Zoe's eyes lit up. "The digital paper trail," she said with a grim smile. "I love it. Where do we start?" For the next 2 weeks, my apartment became a war room. We turned my living room into a forensic accounting office. We bought a huge whiteboard and started creating a timeline. We went back to the very beginning. I dug out my old, dusty notebooks from my college apartment, the ones filled with my first formula experiments. I found the receipt for the double boiler from the thrift store. It was a small, faded piece of paper, but it felt like the first brick in my wall of evidence. We moved on to the digital records. I spent days combing through my old email accounts, searching for the first communications I had with suppliers, the original domain registration for the website, the confirmation email for my sole proprietorship business license. Every email was time-stamped, a digital fossil proving I was doing this alone years before Rachel showed any interest. We printed them out and pinned them to the whiteboard under the heading, The Foundation, Year 15. Next, we tackled the finances. I had every bank statement, every loan application, every credit card bill from the start. They showed my initial investment of a few $100s from my savings, the small business loan I took out entirely in my name with my own apartment as collateral, and the slow, painful crawl towards profitability. There was no trace of Rachel anywhere. No investment, no shared bank accounts, no financial risk on her part whatsoever. Zoe focused on the operational records from the time she started. She pulled up the initial supplier contracts I had negotiated, the purchase orders for our first real equipment, and the sales data that showed our steady, organic growth long before the national launch. She found the email chain where I first contacted the beauty blogger whose review made us go viral. It was all there, in black and white, a clear and undeniable record of my work. The most damning evidence came from my communications with Rachel herself. I found old text messages. "Hey, how's the Goop business going? Lol," one from her read dated 6 years ago. Another, "Can't make it for dinner, have a work thing. Hope you're not spending all night playing with your potions." And then there were the emails surrounding the national launch. I had the initial email where I offered to hire her as a freelance consultant for a flat fee. I had the invoice she sent me for her services, clearly labeled Public Relations Consulting. And I had the bank transaction showing my company, Aura Organics, paying that invoice in full. She wasn't a partner receiving a profit share. She was a contractor who had been paid for a service. We organized everything meticulously. We created a chronological binder, thick with documents. Each section was labeled Initial Formation and Funding, Product Development, Early Growth and Sales pre-Rachel, Freelance PR Contract National Launch, and Post-Launch Growth Analysis. Zoe, with her love for spreadsheets, created charts and graphs that visually represented the company's growth over time, clearly showing that the dramatic upward trend began long before Rachel's minimal involvement. We were not just collecting memories, we were building an airtight legal and financial case. Every document was a piece of the truth, and together they formed an unbreakable chain. As the binder grew thicker, my confidence grew with it. The fear and doubt Rachel had instilled in me began to evaporate, replaced by a steely certainty. She had built her kingdom on lies, but I had the receipts, and I was about to burn her kingdom to the ground with them. With our binder of evidence, which we nicknamed the Book of Truth, complete, the question was no longer if I would confront them, but how. I couldn't let it be a repeat of the last disastrous dinner. Another emotional argument over a meal would allow Rachel to dismiss me as hysterical again. My father would shut down, and the facts would be lost in the drama. No, this had to be different. It had to be cold, professional, and undeniable. "We can't do this at your house or your dad's," Zoe said, tapping her pen on the binder. "Those are emotional spaces. You need a neutral territory, a place where business is done." She was right. I needed to remove the family dynamic as much as possible and force them to see this for what it was, a business dispute initiated by a fraudulent claim. An idea began to form in my mind. "What about the conference room at the workshop?" I suggested. It was my turf. It was professional, and more importantly, it had a large screen monitor and a projector. I wasn't just going to give them a binder, I was going to give them a presentation. The plan was set. I needed to control the narrative, the environment, and the flow of information. I sent a simple, carefully worded email to my father and Rachel. Subject: Urgent business meeting regarding the future of Aura Organics. Dear Dad and Rachel, following our last conversation, I have given your proposal serious consideration. I agree that a formal discussion about the company's structure and history is necessary to move forward. I have booked the conference room at the workshop for this Sunday at 2 p.m. Please be prompt. I will be presenting a comprehensive overview of the business, and it's crucial we are all on the same page. Best. Freya. The tone was deliberately corporate and impersonal. I didn't say I agreed to her terms, only that I agreed to a discussion. I used phrases like comprehensive overview and crucial we are all on the same page to frame it as a standard business meeting, not a family squabble. It was bait, and I knew Rachel's arrogance and my father's desire for a professional resolution would make them take it. Rachel replied within minutes, "Sounds productive, see you then." My father's reply was warmer, filled with relief. "This is a very mature step, Freya. I'm proud of you for being willing to work this out. See you Sunday." Reading his words, a part of me felt a pang of sadness. He genuinely believed I was coming around to their side. He had no idea I was preparing for war. The next few days were spent in meticulous preparation. Zoe and I converted our binder of evidence into a crisp, clear PowerPoint presentation. We didn't want it to look like a scrapbook of grievances. We wanted it to look like a report you'd present to a board of directors. The presentation was divided into 7 sections, mirroring the chapters of the company's life. Slide Deck 1, Genesis. Scanned images of my original notebooks, the receipt for my first equipment, the date of the sole proprietorship registration. Slide Deck 2, the grind years. Financial statements showing my sole financial investment, the loan documents in my name only, screenshots of the terrible first website I built myself. Slide Deck 3, the tipping point. A timeline showing the date of the blog review, the corresponding spike in sales, and the first retail contracts, all predating any involvement from Rachel. Slide Deck 4, the consultant, a dedicated section for Rachel. It featured a copy of our freelance agreement, the exact wording of the services she was contracted for, and the invoice she submitted for her work. Slide Deck 5, the payment. A screenshot of the bank transfer from Aura Organics to Rachel's personal account with the memo line, "Payment for PR services." Slide Deck 6, the lie. This section was the most brutal. We put screenshots of her social media posts where she used "we" and "our company" next to time-stamped text messages from the same periods where she was dismissive and uninvolved. The contrast was jarring. Slide Deck 7, the truth. A final, simple slide with the company's official legal registration, showing one owner, Freya. Zoe agreed to be there, not as an emotional support animal, but as a silent witness and technical support. She would run the presentation, clicking through the slides as I spoke. Her presence would also serve as a reminder that I wasn't alone. There were other people who knew the truth. On Sunday morning, I felt a strange calm. I chose my outfit carefully, a sharp, dark blazer, tailored trousers, and simple heels. I wanted to look like the CEO I was. When I walked into the workshop, Zoe was already there, setting up the projector. The conference room table was polished, with 3 bottles of water and 3 notepads placed precisely, one at each seat. "You ready for this?" Zoe asked softly. I took a deep breath. "I am," I said, my voice steady. She wanted to rewrite history. Today, she's getting a history lesson. I placed 2 copies of the Book of Truth on the table, one for my father and one for Rachel. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for them to walk into it. The boardroom was no longer just a meeting place. It was my stage. And the performance was about to begin. They arrived at exactly 2 p.m. Rachel walked in first, radiating a confident, magnanimous energy, as if she were a CEO arriving to finalize a friendly merger. She was dressed in a stylish, expensive-looking dress, ready to celebrate her victory. My father followed, his expression one of paternal pride and relief. He smiled at me, a warm, genuine smile that for a second made my stomach twist with guilt. He truly thought this meeting was his doing, a sign of his daughters finally seeing reason. "Freya, this is wonderful," he said, gesturing around the conference room. "So professional. I knew you two could sort this out like adults." "Hi, Dad. Rachel," I said, my voice even and calm. "Please have a seat. Zoe is just here to help with the presentation." Rachel glanced at Zoe with a flicker of annoyance but quickly masked it. She sat down, placing her designer handbag on the table, and looked at me expectantly. "All right, Freya, so you've reviewed the partnership agreement? Dad and I think it's the perfect way to move forward." I didn't answer her question. Instead, I sat down opposite them and folded my hands on the table. "Before we discuss any future agreements," I began, my voice clear and measured, "I thought it was important to establish a factual baseline of the company's history to ensure we're all aligned. I've prepared a brief presentation." I nodded to Zoe. The lights dimmed slightly, and the projector whirred to life. The first slide appeared on the large screen, a crisp, white background with the Aura Organics logo and the title, "Aura Organics, A Founder's History." My father leaned forward with interest. Rachel, however, shifted in her seat, a slight frown appearing on her face. This wasn't the quick signing she had anticipated. I stood up and walked towards the screen, holding a small remote to advance the slides. "Let's start at the beginning," I said, clicking to the next slide. An image of my tattered notebook from college, open to a page with a smudged recipe for a calendula balm, filled the screen. Aura Organics began in 2012, in my college apartment kitchen, as a response to my own struggles with eczema. The initial startup capital was $475, taken from my personal savings account. A scanned copy of the bank statement from that month appeared beside the notebook. I clicked again. The company was legally registered as a sole proprietorship in my name in 2014. The official registration document, with my name listed as the sole owner, filled the screen. My father was watching intently, nodding along. This was all familiar to him. I moved through the next few slides quickly, detailing the early years. The self-funded website, the first 1,000 units sold, the slow but steady growth. With each slide, I presented an artifact, an invoice, a sales report, an email. Then I arrived at the tipping point. In 2019, a review from a popular beauty blogger caused a massive spike in sales, leading to our first major growth phase and the hiring of our first employee, Zoe. I gestured to Zoe, who gave a small, professional nod. My father smiled. "I remember that. That was a wonderful bit of luck." "It was," I agreed. "And it led to our first major retail contracts in 2020. As you can see from these documents, all of this was achieved before Rachel had any formal or informal involvement with the company." Rachel's posture had stiffened. Her breezy confidence was gone, replaced by a tense watchfulness. "Freya, what is the point of all this?" she cut in, her voice sharp. "We all know you started it. The point is how I professionalized it and made it what it is today." "I'm glad you brought that up," I said, turning to her with a cool smile. I clicked the remote. A new section title appeared on the screen. Section 4, The Consultant. "In 2022, for the National Department Store launch, I contracted you for public relations services," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. The next slide showed the email where I offered her the job. I read it aloud. "Hi Rachel, hope you're well. As discussed, I'd like to formally offer you a freelance contract to handle the PR for the upcoming launch. The fee will be $5,000 for the 3-month campaign. Do you recall this, Rachel?" She stared at the screen, her mouth a thin line. "Obviously." I clicked again. The invoice she had sent me appeared on the screen, her name and address at the top, the description of services clearly listed. "And this is the invoice you submitted for that work." Click. A screenshot of the bank transfer from the Aura Organics business account to her personal account. "And this is the record of my company paying you, in full, for your services as a contractor." A dead silence filled the room. My father was staring at the screen, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked from the projected invoice to Rachel, then to me. "A contractor?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Rachel, you told me you were working on sweat equity." Rachel's face flushed a deep red. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting things, Freya. That fee was a token amount. It didn't reflect my strategic value." "Let's talk about that strategic value," I said, my voice hardening. I clicked to the next slide. Section 6, The Lie. On one side of the screen was a screenshot of her Instagram post from the launch party with the caption, We've dreamed of this moment since we were little girls." On the other side was a text message from her, dated just 2 years prior. "Honestly, Freya, I don't get why you waste so much time on this hobby." A gasp escaped my father's lips. Rachel looked as if I had physically struck her. I didn't stop. I showed another slide, her post about our family company, next to an email where she declined to help me pack orders because she had a more important networking event. The evidence was relentless, clinical, and brutal. With each click, another piece of her narrative shattered. Finally, I arrived at the last slide. It simply showed the company's official legal registration again. "Aura Organics has one owner," I said, my voice ringing with finality in the quiet room. "It is not a partnership. It is not a family business. It is my company." I turned off the projector. The room was plunged back into normal light, which seemed harsh and unforgiving. I looked at my father. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. He looked at the thick binder on the table in front of him, then slowly turned his gaze to Rachel. Rachel was trembling, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Her smiles had not just shattered, they had been ground into dust. You did all this to embarrass me?" she hissed, her voice shaking. "No," I replied, my own voice surprisingly steady. "I did this to tell the truth. You tried to steal my life's work, Rachel. You lied to our father and tried to turn him against me. You demanded 40% of something you never built. This wasn't an embarrassment. This was an audit, and you failed." My father finally spoke, his voice heavy with shock and regret. He looked at Rachel. "Is this true? The invoice? The texts? Did you lie to me?" Rachel just stared at him, cornered and exposed. For the first time in her life, she had no PR spin, no charming lie, no clever deflection. She just had the ugly, undeniable truth laid bare on a conference room screen. She pushed her chair back violently, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the room without another word, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed the final, definitive collapse of her deception. In the deafening silence that followed Rachel's exit, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. My father sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the blank screen where the evidence of his daughter's deceit had been displayed. He looked older than he had just an hour before, the confident, proud set of his shoulders now slumped in defeat. He slowly reached out and placed a hand on the binder, the Book of Truth, as if to confirm it was real. He didn't look at me for a long time. When he finally did, his eyes were filled with a profound and complicated mix of shame, regret, and sorrow. "Freya," he began, his voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. She told me. She painted such a convincing picture. I thought I was helping to protect the family's future. I thought I was being a good father, ensuring both my daughters were taken care of." "You chose to believe the story that was easier to believe, Dad," I said, my voice softer now, the anger having dissipated, leaving only a vast, aching sadness. "You saw me as the dreamy artist and her as the sharp businesswoman because that's who you've always thought we were. You never stopped to look at the facts." He flinched as if my words were a physical blow because he knew they were true. As a financial advisor, his entire career was built on due diligence, on verifying claims, on looking at the hard data. But when it came to his own family, he had let emotion and a well-spun narrative completely blind him. He had failed his own professional code. "I am so sorry," he whispered, and the two words were utterly inadequate for the depth of the betrayal I had felt, but I could hear in his tone that they came from a place of genuine brokenness. "I pushed you, I called you selfish. I took her side without question. I broke your trust." I just nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. Zoe, who had remained silent and professional throughout the entire confrontation, quietly began packing up the laptop. She gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze as she passed, a small gesture of solidarity that meant the world. My father and I sat there for another 10 minutes, the space between us filled with the wreckage of what had been broken. There would be no easy hug, no simple, "I forgive you." The damage was too deep. He had allowed my sister to gaslight me, and he had been her most powerful tool. The relationship between us was fundamentally altered, and we both knew it. He eventually stood up, looking utterly lost. "I need to go think," he said, and walked out, leaving me alone in the conference room that had served as both a courtroom and a crucible. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a deep, pervasive quiet. Rachel refused to speak to me. She blocked my number and my social media accounts. She didn't respond to my father's calls either. She had been so thorough. Lie and publicly exposed that her only defense was to vanish, to retreat into a cocoon of silence. The family dynamic was fractured, perhaps irreparably. Holiday gatherings and weekly dinners became a thing of the past. The easy warmth we once shared was replaced by a strained, painful distance. But amid the rubble of my family life, something else was happening. A profound sense of lightness was settling over me. For years, I had been living under the shadow of Rachel's judgment and my father's conditional approval. I had worked tirelessly, partly to prove to them, and to myself, that my passion was valid. Now, I no longer needed their validation. The act of defending my work, of laying out the undeniable truth of my own effort and sacrifice, had been its own reward. It had cemented my identity, in a way no one could ever challenge again. Aura Organics flourished. Freed from the toxic drama, I poured all my energy back into my true passion. I hired a real, professional PR firm that respected my vision and amplified my story, the true story. We expanded into the European market, and the launch was even more successful than the one in the US. Zoe was promoted to Chief Operating Officer, a title she had long deserved. We built a team of people who were passionate, honest, and dedicated. The company culture became one of transparency and mutual respect, a direct reflection of the values I had fought so hard to protect. Months went by. I eventually started speaking to my father again. Our conversations were stilted at first, filled with unspoken apologies and unresolved pain. But slowly, we began to build something new. He started asking about the business not as a skeptical investor, but as a father genuinely trying to understand his daughter's world. He acknowledged the years of hard work he had overlooked and expressed a quiet, humble pride in what I had built. It wasn't the relationship we had before, but in some ways, it was more honest. I never heard directly from Rachel. I learned through an aunt that she had moved to a different city and taken a job with another PR firm. I sometimes wonder if she ever feels remorse, or if she has simply constructed a new narrative in which she is the victim. I suspect it's the latter, but I've realized it no longer matters. Her opinion of me, of my life, of my success, has no power anymore. By claiming my story, I reclaimed my freedom. The price was the family I thought I had, but the reward was the discovery of the person I truly was, a founder, a creator, and a survivor who had the receipts to prove it. And my future, built on a foundation of truth, was finally entirely my own.